Well, thank you for that introduction. The goal of this presentation and of this project was to bring a bit of social psychology to web science. And this is work, as has been mentioned, that Bruno Abrahau, who's here in the audience right now, did together with myself and with Karen Cook, who is a sociologist at Stanford. And the research question we want to ask is whether status accrues to powerful actors. And we want to draw a distinction between these two concepts of status and power that are related but distinct and are oftentimes conflated in the literature. And the operational definition we will be working with today is that of status as esteem, high regard, appreciation, and so forth. This is intuitive. And of power as access to resources. And I want to point out that both of these concepts are networked concepts. They have a relational view. And this may sound obvious, but you have to keep in mind that if you ask the person on the street, what does having power mean? Typically, the person on the street will think that power is this kind of absolute thing, where you have power because you have power, because it seems very static. I will detail on this understanding in a bit. And why is it worth exploring? Why is this question even worth asking? It's worth asking because this is an intuitive principle of social life. We would think that the powerful, the people with resources, will also acquire esteem. It's also a basic process of social theory, as I will detail in a second, and it can be used to build models of society that we believe are parsimonious and useful. Also, this is very difficult to measure in practice. Typically, when we try and look into these basic social processes, we try to simulate something in the lab, create some kind of artificial environment, deceive people into believing certain things, and then measure what happens. Well, unfortunately, when we're talking about something as complicated as status, the deception is pretty hard to achieve, and it's quite hard to get the right kind of environment. Unfortunately, we live in great times for this sort of research, so we don't have to worry about that. And also, since this is a conference on that also talks about networks and graphs and all these very exciting new things, may I also point out that this is also a critical factor influencing the evolution and growth and the link structure of networks. So before I go any further, let me introduce the idea of exchange networks. Exchange networks are basically social networks over which you have a flow of resources. And the definition of resources is very broad. It encompasses economic goods, which you think of as resources typically, but it also encompasses advice, as Peter Blau showed in his work from the 1960s. It also encompasses, say, scientific collaborations. Basically, this permeates social life. And this gives us, this kind of analysis gives us an opportunity to gain some kind of understanding of network structure beyond this kind of static picture that we're all used to. So here are the basic ideas from exchange theory that interest us today. We typically face a situation where actors have a heterogeneous resource endowment. Some people have a lot of resources, some people have few resources, some people have few resources. And the principle that I want to introduce is a very simple relationship that basically says the power of A over B is the dependence of B over A. And this essentially means that B, the low power actor needs to want the resources that A can offer them, needs to value those resources. And in that case, the powerful actor is in a position to grant, deny, or hinder the other person's gratification. And this creates a relational definition of power, as I said, which in its time, when it was first brought up 50 years ago, was revolutionary. Now I think I think we all understand where this is coming from. Power is positioned in an exchange network. And here's the interesting thing. This was Richard Emerson's contention. Power imbalance relationships are unstable. If you're dependent on somebody and they are not dependent on you, this is a bad situation. It's not a bad situation necessarily, but it's a situation that in the long run cannot last. And there's a tendency towards balance, and Emerson, in a famous paper, described 4 such operations. The first one is withdrawal. The second one is seeking alternative sources for your resources. The third one would be forming some coalition with other low-power actors, if you're the low-power actor. And the fourth one, which we will examine today, is status giving. This is a basic social process. So, from power to status, how do we get there? We will look at we'll do a statistical analysis of a sample of dyads from couchsurfing.com. What is Couchsurfing? It's an international hospitality exchange network, has over 4 million members worldwide. Basically, it allows people to find a place to sleep anywhere in the world or offer their place to sleep for a stranger to come in. And actually, there's been some very exciting research that's been done on this organization before. Lada, who is here in the audience, and her group did some great work. And we believe that this organization in particular, because of some accidents of how they measure things, they actually have very high quality and very interesting data. And for the purpose of this project, I will distinguish between 2 roles which people may play, and those are the roles of host and surfer. People may specialize in one role or another, or they may play both roles, but in the context of these interactions, one person will be the host and one person will be the surfer. And the key question here, the key assumption we go by, and it's a fairly reasonable assumption, is that couches are actually the kind of resources that give power to hosts and make surfers dependent on them. As in, a couch is essentially a place to sleep. It doesn't have to be an actual couch, but I'll refer to it as a couch because it makes things simple. So basically, if you're the host, you're in the position to deny somebody access to your place to sleep. Whereas the surfer does not really have any resources per se to offer you. There's no money changing hands, I should point out. So if this is the case, we should observe some form of status giving. So why should we observe some form of status giving? Because basically all the other operations cannot work, because we are going to measure this after the interaction is over. So you've already let somebody into your house if you're the host, and now both of you are going to rate each other. So this is post hoc measure. This is a post hoc measure, and basically everything, all the other operations are kind of precluded by logic. So the little animation I did here just shows, how none of the other operations could basically go there. There couldn't be any other actors involved. We couldn't have an H prime actor involved, another host. We couldn't have another surfer. And what you can see, so, imagine the blue arrow is the flow, the blue arrow is the couch, and the orange arrow is the flow of status. This is what we expect to see. So how are we going to measure this? We took a random sample of 80,000 post-hosting interactions when people are asked to rate each other, and these typically occur very quickly after the hosting has ended. I can make that claim based on ethnographic study. And this was collected over, this represents a span of over 8 years. The constraint we imposed to deal with the fact that a lot of people, when using web services, maybe create a profile and never return, we wanted to have people who actually cared about this organization and were involved in the life of this organization. So we imposed a very conservative constraint here. We said we want only those users who are verified. Verification essentially means that you can donate a little sum of money, and in exchange the organization will send you back a postcard with a secret code that verifies that you actually live at the address you say you live at, and that you also have a credit card in the name you say you have. So this is a big signal of trustworthiness in the network, and of course this network lives on trust. So we want to observe status giving here. We think we're going to observe status giving through 2 things. We have ratings of perceived friendship strength that are collected explicitly. People are asked to report how good friends they are. And we're going to match those ratings. And we're going to do the same thing with ratings of trust that people are asked to report. After the interaction, people are asked, how much do you trust this person? And the catch here is that whereas the friendship rating is reported to the other person, the trust rating is not. It's collected confidentially. So how are we going to measure status more specifically? Let's imagine we have 2 people, A and B, stick figure sociology right here. And one person says, well, this person is my best friend. And the other person says, this person is an acquaintance. This is an extreme case. But in that case, B has gotten status from A because A has just said, oh, this is such a good friend of mine, and the other person is, I don't really know what this person is saying, essentially. We're not going to see a lot of this, this crazy level of inequality, but we will see something. So what do we see? There's lots of things going on here, and I'll not spend a lot of time on all the numbers. All you have to care about here is what happens above the main diagonal. So here we have the cross ratings plotted against each other in a cross tabulation, essentially. And anything, if you compare the results, the cells that are symmetrical to the diagonal, you will see that above the diagonal you have higher values than below the diagonal, generally as a rule. And so, for instance, we have this situation where 1312 surfers said of their host that they're good friends, whereas when the host said that they're just friends, and the reverse situation is only 1244. This is not a large difference. However, when we aggregate everything, we get that we see the friendship ratings being higher in 13,400 dyads, and the reverse happens in only 11,000 dyads. And I would also ask you to notice that over half of the ratings are in the cell of couchsurfing friend to couchsurfing friend. This is kind of an ambiguous category, even though there's a certain order implied in the rating system. And this is potential evidence of anchoring, that people, when people know that their ratings are going to be made public, they're more likely to go to an ambiguous category that will help them. And I would also ask you to notice how hosts are more likely to not leave a rating at all. And this has been pointed out by one of our reviewers, that this is a bit odd because hosts are in their own home. They certainly have access to the internet. And surfers are traveling. So it's harder for surfers to leave ratings, and yet you see them leave ratings. So, okay, let's look at private ratings then. In the case of private ratings, the results are even more striking. You can see here, for instance, that with respect to this pair of cells, we have values that are twice as large for surfers to hosts than for hosts to surfers. And basically, we see this happen here as well. We see status flow in the positive direction in 25,000 dyads, and in the opposite direction in 16,000 dyads. And it's a 53% difference. Same story happens with missing ratings. Hosts are less likely to rate at all. Okay, so another quick result I will present has to do with whether status giving varies with resource valuation. So I mentioned earlier that you care about what resources the other person has, and this should vary. How much status flows in the other direction should vary with how valuable those resources are perceived to be. Thank you. So one determining factor here has to do with direct valuation. The other one has to do with the availability of alternatives. And here we took a slightly smaller sample, and we also looked at the host and surfer attributes, such as the city, and we looked at this formal request that may be accepted or not, these entreaties for hospitality. And again, lots of numbers. I will not spend much time on this, but what we show here is that basically, if you accept fewer requests, you are going to be given more status. If you live in a city where hosts typically receive many requests, you are going to be given more status. If you live in a city where hosts typically accept few requests out of those that they receive, you are going to be given more status. Okay, so what does this mean? This means this is evidence for the validity of Emerson's basic propositions in online social networks. And we also believe this is evidence for more than that. We believe that this may document a basic social fact. We can never know for sure when it comes to social science, but we believe this is good evidence. And because this is a large-scale study, it actually uses real-world data. It's not something that happens in a simulated environment, and it has global reach. It's not an experiment, but it has a lot of advantages. And what's interesting here is that privately collected information shows more status giving than publicly collected ratings. So this might be something we want to care about in the future in how we collect our information, or what kind of information we look at. And we have to keep in mind that exchange systems are not necessarily monetary. Status giving can be a potential foundation for other kinds of exchange systems, as Blau long documented and many others like him. And there are also potential implications for other organizations in this emerging field called the sharing economy. And this is a fascinating field in and of its own, and I think there's a lot of potential there for understanding social interaction in general, not just the field itself. So in future work, here's what we plan on doing. We're planning on examining status beyond the dyad. And that is to ask whether more status accrues to people who show willingness to host others, status in the community, not just dyadically. Can we get back from status to power? I.e., when we have actors who are held in high esteem, do they also get more access to resources in the future? Also, does status giving actually encourage pro-social behavior? Does status giving encourage people to put their resources out there, to keep on being hosts, and thus solve this commons dilemma problem that is very typical of the way social organization works? And also, what are the implications of status giving for the evolution of network topology in terms of who is going to become friends with whom, which friendships are going to be maintained, and so on and so forth? And we also hope to look at other data sources in addition to this great data provided by Couchsurfing. And these would be data sources from other organizations in the sharing economy, potentially from Wikipedia, potentially from open source projects. There are plenty of arenas where we believe this kind of work may be useful. So thank you very much, and I am ready for your questions.